Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. An absolute pleasure to speak to you. How are you doing today? Okay.
I'm doing good.
Love this film. Excuse me. Absolutely amazing, very original, very immersive. But maybe you could, for people who don't know anything about it, give us your own introduction. What can they expect if they watch The Novice?
This is a film about an obsessive girl who's trying to climb the ranks of her team. And, even though it's a film with rowing, it's not about rowing. It's really about grit and ambition.
And I believe it's, heavily inspired by your own experiences of rowing in college, and, that very competitive atmosphere seems to be what has kind of infused the feeling of the film and its main character.
Yeah, I was actually a collegiate rower. I did 4 years, and like Alex, I walked on to a team having no idea what I was getting into, and got obsessed, and it kind of consumed my life. And there is the team component of the competition with the team, but I think like the biggest sort of competition is Alex with herself. I love the obsessed artist trope film. I love that, but usually when I see them, there's like an external force that's driving the character. There's the coach or the mother, or they're trying to make it to the Olympics or this or that. And as someone who's very ambitious myself, very competitive, that's never been how I function. It's always been very internal. And so I wanted to do my version of the obsessed artist movie, where it's about that internal drive, which really dictated a lot of the stylistic choices. But Alex is sort of the hero and the villain of the story.
Mm. And what's the balance then in terms of kind of fact and fiction? What stuff did you take from your own life, and which bits did you kind of fill in to sort of round it out more into a different kind of character and different narrative?
Well, the first draft of the script I wrote, and then by the time we started shooting, it was 2.5 years later. And in that time, I did countless drafts. And also in that time, I had a lot of like horrible life, emotional breakup things happen, heartbreaks of different varieties. And so with every draft, as I lived for 2.5 years, I wrote more and more of that in, because the initial draft was like cathartic for rowing specifically. And so any of the sort of physical things, there's people pissing themselves, there's sort of blacking out, there's the sort of your hands ripped apart, those kind of things are really pulled from my experiences rowing. Either I experienced them, a teammate experienced them, I talked to other rowers about them. And then the sort of emotional, the more emotional components, I would say, were actually pulled from those moments of my life, of the heartbreak and this and that. So, it's a semi-autobiographical too, just in the emotional sense.
Mm. And obviously you've worked on films for a long time, but I believe this is your first feature that you've directed. So what made you decide that this was going to be the story where you were going to, do your first film, being behind the camera?
Well, I wanted to be a director since I was 15. I saw Kill Bill and I was like, holy fuck, I want to do this. And then I went to university and was hit with what I now know is imposter syndrome. And I love post-production. I love that. I went into that for a while, and then kind of getting in the background and seeing how the sausage is made, so to speak. I thought, well, maybe I can do this. And so I set a 5-year goal, November 2016, to transition out of sound and into writing and directing. And at that point, it was a matter of researching and soaking up as much as I could, sort of the career paths of my favorite directors, the types of first films, the scope, the sort of budget range, contained universe. And you also always hear this cliche advice, like, write what you know, write the story only you can tell. And also, like, what do you want to see? And there aren't a lot of rowing movies, probably because they're such a nightmare to shoot. There aren't a lot of rowing movies, and the ones that exist tend to be men and historically set. They're all very like inspirational. There's one scene in The Social Network that's incredible. That's really it. And also, this was such a huge sort of chapter of my life, and so it seemed like the obvious place to go. I was actually looking at writing something rowing related, sort of as a novel, before I made this decision. But once I was on this path, it became a thing.
Mm. And I was wondering, though, what you did take from your other roles, the other work you have done in film, I was thinking particularly, your sound work on films like Whiplash, because I wonder if there's some feeling that's been taken from a film like that into this one, the relentlessness of it, and also how important, in fact, the sounds are and the soundtrack. Like even the sound of people eating sometimes, or when she has thoughts in her head. and then people are chatting. There's definitely something interesting going on there, and how immersed we feel, like in her point of view. But yeah, the soundtrack is often ironic. I think, some of the 50s songs that we hear, when she's kind of really struggling or suffering. So yeah, maybe we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, sound, I know this from experience. Most people in the industry aren't really thinking about it as much as they could, but it's like half the cinematic experience. We see a film, we hear a film, and I think too, as an indie filmmaker, like, it's a pretty cheap tool to like utilize, and people just don't. I also think that sound works on a subliminal level to fuck with people. Like, you can do things with dynamics and with frequencies and putting in this and that. People aren't aware is happening. You put something in a surround speaker, of course this is theatrical, even in the left speaker or whatever, and you put something in your evolutionary sense, like, here's that, and your ears will twitch and you'll react to it, because our sound is like more primitive sense. And for me too, like I mentioned this earlier, but the idea that this is such an internal struggle film, and the question, like, film is not a novel, so you can't like write what the character is thinking. You have to put it, it's the classic show don't tell, you have to put it on the screen, you have to put it in the speakers. And so that's really that drove the sort of sound design choices of that immersive feel of doing that. And two, with the soundtrack, with the musical choices, specifically the songs, those were kind of even written into the script. And the idea there being, this is sort of very loosely a romance between a girl and a sport, right? Like a very sort of fucked up, twisted one. So if you look at it from that angle, it's sort of the initial attraction, the clunky beginnings, the first time making love, which is the super, super slow-mo scene with Someday I'll Want You to Want Me, and the being blissfully in love is all the law, the foggy row in the lake, and then there's a slow kind of toxic crumbling that happens, where those songs that were once kind of hopeful become like fucked up and twisted, and then not being afraid to get in there and actually twist stuff. The idea to like fuck up it was actually score in this particular case, but as she's like the montage of her rising up rowing, falling down in school, to twist things per each shot was taken from I saw the sound panel for Wild, where they did that with and that always stuck with me for like years and years and years and years, and I thought that was such an interesting tool.
And what can you tell us about your cast, in particular, working with Isabel? Because of course, so much is from her perspective. The camera's, almost exclusively trained on her face, for large stretches of it. So I bet that casting decision was going to be really crucial for you. And then, you must have really put her through her paces in terms of the physical aspects. I don't know how much of that is, she's actually doing, and that's her real sweat, or that's added, but, she's pretty much sweat drenched or covered in rain, or, really, really training hard throughout the whole thing. So how did you work with her to achieve your vision?
Yeah, I mean, I told the producers from the beginning, and I told Isabel when we had our first meeting, I was like, there are no doubles in this. You're doing all the rowing, and this is not a sport you can pick up in an afternoon or even a week. So she had 6 weeks when she was cast to start training, and was rowing up to 6 hours a day in that time. And her hands, just like Alex in the movie, her hands were getting ripped apart in blisters. She was waking up at 4 a.m. to drive across the city, and then rowing, taking a nap, rowing again, taking a nap. It was lifting, was doing this whole thing. So that really got her in the headspace. And then too, I mean, like, part of the reason I cast her is I was like looking for someone who had there was a physicality that I knew that they needed, but also a sort of ferocious energy, because this wasn't going to be an easy shoot. I mean, she is in every set. We were shooting this in Canada, like right on the edge of wintertime. It was cold. She was going in the water, to the point, like, she did a couple takes, but by the end she couldn't, like, her hands had just, like, gone like this. And she's like, Lauren, I'm so sorry, I can't do another one. I'm like, no, get her out, like, get her out. Yeah, I mean, it was great working with her. And the first week too was water week, so we shot all the exterior rain and stuff on the water, which for me as a director, I was so focused on the logistical clusterfuck of having sometimes a dozen boats in a confined space all moving around. You have the 5 boats, like the last race, for instance, you have the 5 boats with the girls, the coach boat, the sound boat, the safety boat, the light boat, the camera boat, the house boat, taxi boat. So there's 12 boats, all bumper boats. And the city had opened the dam to drain the lake, and they didn't tell us they were doing that. So everything was getting sucked down the fucking river. Like, I was just trying to like make sure people stayed upright in the boats and whatever. But every time I looked at the monitor, Isabel had such command of the character. It was easy to just have trust in her to take control of that. And then once we got to the sort of dialogue scenes, I think we had gone through the trenches together, so to speak. So there was a real easy, intimate kind of working relationship.
Mm. And, you know, what about the way you have shot the sport and the experience of doing it? I feel like it sort of flips between, which is probably the reality of it, right? Which is, you know, sometimes it just looks so unappealing. Like, can't imagine why anybody would want to sort of get up at 5 a.m. and be on a freezing cold river, you know, in the rain. But then when you see that scene, for example, you know, when she's in the mist, it's suddenly very beautiful and incredibly peaceful. And suddenly you're able to see the appeal that all that hard work can really have a payoff. So was that kind of the sort of the duality of it that you wanted to present?
Yeah, I mean, I think with rowing, with any kind of obsession, with any kind of relationship, there's always like the good that you're chasing, that like hit of when it was like bliss and you're just trying to get back to that moment and that feeling. So yeah, absolutely wanted to show that. And then I feel like I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought. So hopefully that answers what you asked.
And what about the main character? Because like you said at the beginning, her competitive nature is almost basically really with herself. You know, it kind of feels like, in a way, rowing itself could be anything. You know, it's either she has to be the best, or there's no point doing it at all. And sometimes we can feel very empathetic with her, but other times perhaps we can feel a bit distant from her. Like you said, it's not even like the coaches are pushing her that hard. They're saying, you know, chill out, calm down, you know, take your time, you're only just started. So I wonder what kind of relationship you want the audience to have with your character. Like you said at the beginning as well, kind of the hero and the villain.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things are happening. One, yeah, Isabel and I joke this literally could be the same movie, but with like ping pong or anything. And I think that too, the thing that's happening is, for the first half of the film, you're kind of rooting for her as an underdog and like, you can do it. And then the second half of the film, you're kind of still rooting for her, but also like, what the fuck, like stop at the same time. So it's this weird kind of duality. And then for me too, I mean, this film is sort of my existentialist anthem. And, you know, nihilism is life has no meaning. Existentialism is you have to give life meaning yourself. And for Alex in this film, it's rowing. But we get the sense, as we learn a little bit about her, that like you said, it could have been anything. It could have been ping pong. After this, she's gonna like learn how to rock climb. She's gonna get her first internship. You know, we made that joke that you can kind of have like sequels of Alex finding her new obsession and doing her new thing.
Mm. And I also wondered, you know, I've just been watching a few different kind of films that have like horror, thriller influence, you know, by female film directors. I don't know if you've seen like A Banquet, and where there's almost like this element of like body horror sometimes. And like, maybe there's something very specific about the female experience too, and our experience with our bodies and food. And kind of the way you can use cinema as a medium to try and sort of capture that and allow people to sort of have a glimpse into that experience. So do you think you took any influences kind of from body horror, thriller, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happening, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but specifically with me in this film is the thing that this is obviously a generalization, but this idea, when we see men typically in these types of roles, like when they get mad, when they get upset, they're punching a wall, they're punching each other, or starting a war or whatever, they're puffing their chest out. I think that women, the way that we are competitive, the way that we react to stress and things, like, based on my experience and the women that I know, it tends to be more we turn it on ourselves. I think like it's like maybe it's a cultural thing of having to sort of have this image this whole time. I don't know, but yeah. So with Alex, I mean, as she's sort of spiraling, she's turning the body horror because she's trying to like get out this rage somewhere, and she becomes a sort of receptor of that.